both the Bush administration and the Obama administration has budgeted funds, and then funds have been appropriated and authorized to go to the bureaucracy that was created by the Law of the Sea Treaty. These are the fun organizations with names like the International Seabed Authority and the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf and the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. And for
the enterprise.
yeah, obviously some of this money trickles down to the enterprise, which is this very, I mean, all these terms sound Orwellian to me, but the enterprise is a favorite of mine. And for some reason, you know, they thought it was a good idea for the United States to send millions of dollars to these organizations, even though the United States was not a party to the treaty. We figured, Senator Duncan's staff and I, and Senator Lamborn's staff, pardon me, Congressman Duncan's. I've been in the Senate for the last month straight, so forgive me. You know, they agreed that it's probably a bad idea to send millions of dollars in this economic situation we're in to fund international organizations where we're not even a party to the treaty. I mean, we don't fund the International Criminal Court, you know, for crying out loud. So, very simple amendment. You know, no funds shall, you know, from the NDAA, you know, shall be used for any organization created by the Convention on the Law of the Sea, including these Orwellian ones that I've already identified for you. And I don't know, we thought it was a long shot. I mean, it was kind of a shot across the bow to say, you know, we're throwing this out there. This is good for messaging. It's a good way to get the House involved. And then we knew that we touched a nerve because we got a letter that the Chamber of Commerce was key voting it in the negative, meaning they want their people, they want members of Congress to vote against the amendment. And so luckily, right around that time, things were in motion, and our side of the aisle, Heritage Action, announced their key voting the amendment as well. And a series of blog posts are fired around, and you know, some of the dust flies up and gets support from leadership. And this morning, the amendment passed. So in the NDAA, there is no funds that are going to be sent anymore to these organizations. But the important thing, the total lesson that I take away here is that that amendment wouldn't have stood a chance a couple of years ago. It would have been what we thought it just was. It was kind of a messaging thing, something to put out there. But the work of this group, Frank, the group of the steering committee, the work of the steering committee, the conservative working group, Ed, that you go to, that you chair, the creation of Heritage Action for America, and then, and just as importantly, if not more importantly, the creation of the Congressional Sovereignty Caucus, which the Center for Security Policy, and with the good work of Frank and Ben Lerner and myself and Tom Kilgannon, helped to establish a couple of years ago. I mean, it's no accident that Congressman Duncan is a co-chair, along with Congressman Lamborn, of the Sovereignty Caucus, and he was the one who along with Jim Jordan, were the co-sponsors of this amendment. So the lesson is that these meetings matter. The conservative working group matters. Doing things like the Sovereignty Caucus in the House, even though treaties aren't voted on in the House, it matters. It all culminated for a nice little victory, and we're going to see if we can pound that through, get it through conference, and make it public law. So thanks to you guys, and thanks to Heritage Action. My colleague Trip Baird is here from there. And as Frank mentioned, so we'll take our victories where we can get them. You know, it's not a constitutional amendment or anything, but for the first time, something's been passed that says, you know, we are distancing ourselves from this Law of the Sea Treaty. And it took some members in the House to really get it done. Because on the Senate side, they're moving ahead full steam. And we don't have nearly as much, you know, they don't have caucuses over there. You know, we've got the steering committee. That's our number one organization that's really go-to. And Ed's conservative working group meeting is a great place to go and talk about these issues. But when you've got Senator Kerry as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, and you've got Senator Lugar as the ranking member, it's difficult to get penetration. Now, luckily, over the years, more and more of our kind have joined the Foreign Relations Committee. So although they might have Senator Lugar, they've also got Senator DeMint, Senator Barrasso, Senator Inhofe, Senator Risch, and others who are as skeptical of the law of the sea treaty as we are. But nevertheless, Senator Kerry apparently wants to be the next Secretary of State in a second Obama administration. So he saw the law of the sea treaty and still sees it as low-hanging fruit. And so their first hearing is next Wednesday, so just a couple of days away. And as Frank mentioned, they're lining up the brass. So Panetta and Secretary Clinton and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, are going to be testifying. You might ask if there is a second panel where thoughtful people who might have a different opinion will be heard from. The answer is no. The only three people that they will hear from are three people who are, fully on board with the treaty. So where does that leave us? Well, here, for our purposes, as conservatives and as people who strongly believe in a strong national security, the thing that you might hear most about, and the thing that might make you question the law of the sea treaty most about, is the fact that our Navy is a big fan. And our Navy's been in support of the treaty for a long time. But a couple of months ago, I really started to drill down on their claims. Because as a conservative and someone over at Heritage, where 99 times out of 100, the Navy comes to us and says, hey, we need something for a successful operation. We need this, we need that. Just like any other good conservative, we salute and say, we're behind you, we'll help you with that. But on the law of the sea treaty, we don't have that. So I questioned why. And we had a breakfast with the Chief of Naval Operations last year, and then I followed up with lengthy meetings at the Pentagon, really trying to see what was the Navy's problem. Why are they so in favor of this of this treaty? And it's tough to figure out their motivation, especially when the Navy spoke in these particular catchphrases that was their reason for supporting the treaty. Nothing based on hard fact or hard evidence, but things like, we need a seat at the table, and we need to reassert American leadership in maritime affairs. This is argument by slogan, not by arguing any facts or showing any law. And after I was happy myself with that was the only thing they had, I went ahead and wrote this paper, which has been distributed to you folks, to really disassemble the Navy's case, one brick at a time, such as it is. I mean, their case is very weak when you're required to campaign by slogan like seat at the table. Seat at the table is a favorite of mine. As if there is some mythical table sitting out somewhere in Kingston, Jamaica, and all of these people with epaulets on their shoulders are sitting around it and debating whether or not they're going to continue to allow freedom on the high seas. And my Lord, if the U.S. doesn't have an admiral at that table, they're just going to run roughshod over our 11 carrier groups, I guess, is what they think is going to happen. Dempsey appeared at a, the Pew Charitable Trust and the Atlantic Council had a big powwow a couple of weeks ago where Panetta and Dempsey keynoted, and Dempsey got up and made jokes about how, I'm an Army guy, but we really need this in the Navy. And then he read the speech that was put in front of him, and it was the least inspiring reading of a speech I'd ever heard. I mean, you could have been reading a roll call vote. Panetta, on the other hand, was very passionate, and so I mean, they've got everyone lined up, and they all used the same bromides. They all said seat at the table, reasserting American leadership. But the fact of the matter is, as we all know, in the fact-based world, the reality-based world, we have a seat if there's a table out there where somebody's talking about navigational rights, not as the United States at the table, we're standing at the podium in front of the table. I mean, we are the preeminent naval power, and there's not a close second. And so then they'll say reassert American leadership when it comes to maritime issues, as if we're not a founding member of the Arctic Council, as if we don't attend and dominate the major maritime powers' annual meetings, that we're not the leading voice at the International Maritime Organization. that we don't have the largest naval force on the planet that the planet has ever seen. And yet somehow we need to reassert American leadership in maritime affairs. And they actually will sit there and tell you with a straight face, you know, we go to these international conferences to talk about these maritime issues, and they say, hey, why should we listen to you? You guys aren't even a party to the Law of the Sea Treaty. As if that could be a persuasive argument to someone like us. My first reaction is, what are we paying you guys for? You think you're going to be embarrassed by Lithuania telling us we should join the Law of the Sea Treaty? Or maybe a landlocked country telling us we should join the Law of the Sea Treaty? You know, we pay diplomats and four-star generals to go out there and represent the policy of the United States of America, which currently is to not join this treaty. We haven't joined it for 30 years. That's what your answer should be, Mr. Chairman, or Assistant Secretary of Oceans, Environment, and Silliness. You know, you get embarrassed at an international conference, I don't care. You're representing the people of the United States, which have chosen not to join this treaty. So if you don't like that, I think you need to find a new line of work. Now, the good news is when you drill down on the Navy's actual case, as I have in this paper, you'll find out that it's completely baseless. And the slogans and the bromides are all they have. And the best way to kind of illustrate that is just to drill down just on one anecdote. Indonesia, as a party to the Law of the Sea Treaty, wanted to restrict freedom of navigation through its archipelago. So the Law of the Sea Treaty requires archipelagic states who want to designate sea lanes to go to the International Maritime Organization, which, as I mentioned, is an organization that actually deals with the nuts and bolts of law of the sea issues, where the United States has a preeminent role. And you see that Indonesia just wanted these 3 north-south routes through their archipelago. They did not want one that went east-west. You see the crucial Strait of Malacca on the far left side of the map. They wanted to stop a route that would go from the Strait of Malacca and then to the east through the Java Sea and the Banda Sea, and then out through the Arafura Sea. You know, the crucial sea route through the archipelago, and one that our Navy, as I'm sure Ace can attest to, have been steaming through in formation for many, many years. It's the key sea route through Indonesia. So Indonesia went to the IMO and said, no, we just want to have these 3 lanes. And the United States, even though we're not a party to the Law of the Sea Treaty, the panacea, the cure-all of all things maritime, we were able to stop them in their tracks and say, no, we will completely veto any designation of your sea lanes that doesn't include that east-west sea lane. So when you confront Navy folks about that, they're like, yeah, we did that. Now you were successful in doing that. Yeah, that wasn't even that heavy a lift. Yeah. So tell me again why we need to be a party to the Law of the Sea Treaty. Well, we want a seat at the table. I'm like, what table were you guys sitting at when you stopped this from happening? You know, an actual table sitting, in Geneva is where the IMO is. This is just one anecdote of several that I illustrate throughout this paper, just to indicate when you look at the law. I'm a recovering lawyer, I should admit. When you look at the law of the sea, customary international law, widely accepted maritime law, and then you apply the facts and you look at the entire history of our naval operations over the years, it just becomes crystal clear that the Navy does not need this treaty to do its operations. If I believe for a moment that this treaty was necessary for the U.S. Navy to successfully conduct its global mission, I would be the first to say, let's get on it. There's a bunch of stupid parts of this treaty, you know, where we have to share billions of dollars of oil and gas royalties with the so-called developing world from our own oil and gas on the continental shelf, and then we expose ourselves to international environmental lawsuits, and we have to go to the International Seabed Authority to get permission in order to mine the deep seabed. There's all this garbage that's in the treaty. But I'd be willing to look past it if I believe for a second that the U.S. Navy was absolutely essential to have this for them. What Secretary Panetta has a problem with is understanding the nature of sovereignty. You see, in the eyes of internationalists, in the eyes of the people in this treaty, a piece of paper like the Law of the Sea Treaty can somehow grant sovereignty to the United States of America. It's a Think about that for a moment. We're not a country that asserts its own sovereignty and decides whether our continental shelf belongs to us or not. We need to sign on to some goofy 320 article convention in order to claim our sovereignty. It gives us our sovereignty, they say. I mean, when Ronald Reagan declared a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone in 1983 and a 12 nautical mile territorial sea in 1988, and even when President Clinton declared a 24 nautical mile contiguous zone in 1999, you know, these people, these pro-law of the sea people, weren't gnashing their teeth about the unilateral nature of those declarations. And yet they seem to think that we are incapable of declaring the limits of our own continental shelf. This is our land. It's the land that extends out from our own continent and into the ocean. And Reagan knew what he was doing. In 1987, he made a policy statement, his administration made a policy statement that the United States asserts jurisdiction and control over the entirety of its continental shelf, including the extended continental shelf where these oil and gas royalties would be paid. So unilateral proclamations, you know, we're allowed to do those. We don't need a treaty to tell us how wide our territorial sea is, or whether we have a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. Acting as a sovereign nation, acting as an executive, the United States has done and will continue to do that over the years, and those limits have been respected. You don't see any nation coming in and saying, well, no, you don't have a 12 nautical mile territorial sea, so we're gonna, we're gonna have military operations inside your territorial sea. I mean, it's silly. But at bottom, it's just a complete different state of mind between what a progressive thinks about sovereignty and what a conservative, or I would call an American, thinks about sovereignty, which is you don't have to sign a piece of paper that, you know, Zimbabwe and Cuba have signed on to in order to secure your own sovereignty. It's just, you can't get past that barrier with them. Yeah, I mean, don't let me leave you with the impression that the Law of the Sea Treaty is the only game in town. There are a wide and deep array of maritime-related treaties that we have bilaterally, that we have in groups of countries regarding fishing, ocean management, environmental treaties about ships and anti-dumping and safety regulations and search and rescue at sea. There are times when multilateral and sometimes even global treaties can be useful to provide the type of framework. But this hodgepodge, this soup that they've thrown everything into back in the 70s, and the final stages of this treaty was negotiated during the Carter administration. It really went a bridge too far with these royalty sharing provisions and the lawsuits and everything else. If they had just carved off the navigational rights and freedoms and had a separate treaty on those, we would support it. It would have been ratified during Reagan's first term. But unfortunately, some decision was made where all those parts that the Navy likes got mixed in with all of these parts that really fatally flaw the treaty. And that's why, as conservatives and Americans, I don't believe that we can support it.